Oh, intro video. That's what they do. Now let me see if
It says live from my vantage point up in the little corner. It says live. So.
Yeah, I'm trying to. Oh, no, we are. All right, very good. Yep, it's working. All right. We are live. All right. I can also add. Got slides. All right. Hey, we got slides. All right. Very good.
Woo.
Everyone can see that?
Yeah.
All right. So, well, hey, thank you, everybody. Thanks and praises. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. We're here back with episode number 2 of our Goddess Bible study. It's we took last week off, but we're back now, and hopefully this can be a regular thing, and hopefully we'll be growing it. I haven't really done anything to like advertise this or like try and get other people on. So I appreciate y'all being here. We got Rosalie and Lisa with us. So and we'll see if anyone else joins us. But yeah, you guys can mute or probably hide your cameras if you wanted to. Either way. Does anyone want to say hi and introduce themselves real quick or say anything? Or just jump right into it?
Well, I just want to say that I'm going to be muting a lot because I have kittens running around making a ruckus.
Okay. Hopefully my dog will stay quiet.
Yeah.
Charlie may interrupt at some point here. Anyway, all right, well, we'll just jump right into it. Like the idea is just I got a few slides here, talk for a few minutes, and then we can just open the floor to discussion. So yeah, today's topic, we're just gonna, the format of God's Bible studies, we'll just go right through the Bible in order, skipping to the parts we want to talk about, which is the goddesses, the priestesses, the prophetesses, the matriarchs. And so we'll just hit the good stuff and we'll skip over all the boring stuff, which ends up being all the most fun parts of the Bible anyway. It's all the most controversial stuff. So anyway, we're going to start, though, the waters in Genesis 1. So part of my argument about how the Bible is telling the story of the divorce and that, that there is a divine mother. There's always been a tradition of the mother. She's still around. But that the Bible is telling the story of the divorce, and it's a very elaborate, intentional exercise that the biblical writers are doing to get rid of the mother. And one of the things that they do repeatedly that we will see is take their names away, take away the names and cut off the stories so that will just mention these various characters just enough to either denounce them or to like take the little bit of a blessing that they want to take and then shortchange the rest. But they just do it over and over again. And so it starts right in the beginning here, right with the opening lines of the Bible. This is Genesis 1 and the first 2 verses, 1 and 2 of Genesis 1. So very famous. Everyone's heard these lines before. Everyone's familiar with them. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the waters. So the waters are very important here because they're not given a name. They're just mentioned this one time. They're never ever mentioned again in the Bible, but these are very important in the neighboring cultures. As we can see, God created the heavens and the earth, but he did not create these waters. And it's very clear that he's separate from the waters. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God is moving over the surface of the waters. So that word surface gets repeated twice, which really implies very strongly that there is separation between God and the waters. He's separate from these waters. And so he's implicitly, he emerged out of them. Like it doesn't say that, but that's the implication. And biblical scholars have understood this for a long time. He created the heavens and the earth, but the waters were already there. But they don't have a name and they're never ever mentioned again. But all the neighboring cultures do have a name for the mother, for these waters. And it's not always, but most of the time seen as the mother of creation, the salt waters of creation. So right here in the beginning, they're mentioning the waters just enough to like put their worldview in the context of all the worldview of the time. There's like kind of a common worldview across all these neighboring cultures. They mention it just enough to sort of frame their metaphysics, but again, take the name away. So here we go. In ancient Egypt, which is totally neighboring culture, um, the waters aren't referred to as a mother, but they're very important. Um, there's not a specific quote here because there's multiple different stories. But in Egyptian cosmology, the primordial waters are personified as Nun or Nu, so they're given a name, and it's the endless dark ocean that existed before creation. And Nun represents the state of non-being or potential that preceded the ordered cosmos, which is fine. And from these waters, the creator god Ra emerged on a primordial mound and began the process of creation. And obviously, there's a lot that we're just like, that's literally like the opening line of Egyptian cosmology that goes on. And there's multiple creation stories in Egypt. There's not just one creation story, but this is kind of like a basic framework that's pretty common and was really old. And certainly Ra becomes the sun god. And when they get into like later traditions of Egyptian monotheism, it's about Ra. So Ra is the one who comes first. He creates everything else. And even Isis and Osiris, that are all downstream of Ra. But the waters were there already. The waters were already there. Now, over in Mesopotamia, the Sumerians, and then later on the other various Mesopotamian groups, but the Sumerians were the ones that came first. They were the first Bronze Age civilization in Mesopotamia, and they also had the salt waters as the source of all creation. And so for them, the primordial salt water was the mother, and her name was Namu, and she was very kind, and she created humans, and she created all the other gods. So she gives birth to her husband, well, not just her husband actually, but the fresh waters for the Sumerians was named Apsu. So you had the fresh waters and the salt waters. And the freshwater god Apsu was very, very popular and very, very important in Sumerian traditions. In this sort of freshwater, saltwater original parents is like a metaphysics. It's a model that the Sumerians used, but kind of went out of style later on. They shift more to heaven and earth than saltwater, freshwater. But in the earliest stories we have this motif of the saltwater, freshwater. So the Sumerians were in turn defeated by the Akkadians, who set up shop in Babylon ultimately, and they were a little more of a patriarchal, more militant, more patriarchal, a little more violent culture. And so they tell a second generation of stories. We get two generations of a bunch of stories in Mesopotamian mythology, the Sumerian followed by a later one. And so in the second generation, which we'll see in the next slide, called the Enuma Elish, the saltwater mother becomes a villain, and they call her Tiamat, and she becomes the object of what the god of the Babylonians, Marduk, is going to destroy. So the Akkadians made the primordial mother goddess into a villain, and then the Israelites would come along yet even later, and they take the mother goddess out completely. So we see one of my theses, like you get these three generations. You see it with the flood stories too, which will be another day. We'll have the flood stories as a topic one day, but there's three versions of the flood story, or multiple versions, but you get a Sumerian version, a Mesopotamian, or a later Babylonian version, and then the biblical version, are all like following the same pattern I'm describing here. So, next slide. So this is, all right, this is just next slide. All right, the Enuma Elish is the Babylonian story of creation, which I was just talking about. Originally by the Akkadians, it was then used by the Assyrians and across Mesopotamia. This is the one we see in like the Iron Age. Marduk was their king of the gods. So he became king of the gods by slaying Tiamat, the terrifying salt waters, the mother and the terror of all the gods. And Marduk cut Tiamat in half and built a new world from her corpse. And then this is the quote right here. This is the opening lines of the Babylonian story of creation. And there's a bunch of archaeologists have pulled up a bunch of different copies of this from different time periods in the Bronze Age and the Iron Age. The Assyrians have a version. You get the Chaldeans. You have a bunch of different groups of people in Mesopotamia, so it's hard to like pin it right down. But the point is that this is the one that was really popular. So this is the opening lines that are corollary to the opening lines of Genesis. So when in the height heaven was not named, and the earth beneath did not yet bear a name, and the primeval Apsu, that's the freshwaters, who begat them, and Chaos, Tiamat, the mother of them both, their waters were mingled together. So this is like literally the opening lines where it's giving the identity of Tiamat and Apsu, the salt water and the fresh water. And the story goes on from there, where Tiamat is the villain who needs to be destroyed by the other gods. And then this is my last slide I've got. This is contemporary Hinduism, where the salt waters of creation never, have always been around and were never replaced as a motif. They're still here. So they maintain the cosmology of the primordial ocean. And in this image, we have Vishnu, who's the high god. He's like the equivalent of Ra. Depending on how you want to argue it, but anyway, Vishnu. So in this image, and he's got the serpent. We could do a whole nother topic one night on the serpent of creation. But Vishnu lies sleeping on the serpent named Shesha, floating upon the cosmic waters before creation begins. So anyway, this is my last slide, and this is just illustrating that this motif goes on and on and on across cultures. The serpents, the primordial waters of creation, that the primordial waters are the mother. So these primordial waters in turn are Shakti, or part of the Shakti traditions of the mother in contemporary Hinduism. And so so the Bible is taking the name away, and that's kind of like the end of what I've got prepared in terms of the slides I had. So we can just sort of open it up to whatever folks want to say.
The thing that strikes me about all of this that, for me comes from being an animist and understanding the world more in animist types of terms and understanding is water is associated with feminine properties. Like of the four main elements, earth, air, water, fire, earth and water are the ones associated with the feminine, whereas air and fire are associated with the masculine. But it is interesting that in Genesis 1, it's like the water was just there, right?
Right.
The water is just there. So okay, anybody, most people that are reading the Bible probably aren't, using their critical thinking faculties enough to be like, okay, they're just like accepting that the water was just there. They're not being like, well, where did it come from? What was that? It's just interesting.
Yeah, no, I remember being struck by when I first learned this. I actually learned it from Joseph Campbell, who pointed out that these waters are the divine mother without a name. And I was like, oh man, because I grew up in church and no one ever never been mentioned. It was never mentioned that this whole notion that the waters aren't named and that they weren't created. We just skip right over that in our contemporary Christian reading of the Bible. We talk all about God created the heavens and the earth, and they sort of treat it like the waters. Oh, that's just the ocean on the earth, right? And God is just hovering over the ocean here. They don't talk about it in this sort of bigger cosmological way that the waters are distinct from the heavens and the earth. And I just remember being so kind of stunned by that with Joseph Campbell. They're really I remember walking around with that for a few days being like, damn, that was never pointed out to me in all those years in church. So.
Well, the other thing that was going through my mind with these different slides and these different stories is and especially with the Enuma Elish, when Tiamat's belly is split open and everything is created from there. Obviously that's talking so much about birth. That's a birth simulation.
Right.
And, whereas maybe way long time ago, people didn't know, where all of life originated. They did know that babies were born out of a woman and that there was, these fluids, these liquids, the birth included, a woman's water breaking. So that, like, that really all sort of tracks along with, your argument, like that this is the goddess, or this is, God's wife, or what have you. But it just seems like at least there's everybody understands and understood that water was sort of primordial, and in some ways maybe came first, right? And that life comes from the water.
Yeah, I mean that's the way I've always looked at it, was that, biologists will tell us that science will tell us that life emerges out of the oceans and then moves up to the land.
Right.
And I think that there's this sort of an instinctive understanding among the ancients that that was the way it worked. I mean, that's more of my speculation, but that was always my sense of it. Um, and the other thing was that I think the Akkadians are telling this story where they cut down the previous culture and like built a new one on top of the wreckage of the old one. I think this is part of the story, is that they're saying, there was this previous religion and we overhauled it. I think a bunch of different, I think the Greeks do the same kind of thing when they talk about the Olympians defeating the Titans when the Olympian gods become top dog. I think that they're simply referring to the fact that there was an earlier culture there with a different religion, of which, the Titans were the religion of the Mycenaean people. And that, so when the Greeks talk about the Olympians defeating this older generation of gods, they're literally talking about how they had like a culture war in real life and introduced a whole new religion that, absorbed the previous religion, because the old gods were still there, in the Greek world. So I think that that's also the way I've always read this, Enuma Elish, that they're not shy about the fact that, Namu used to be like the kind goddess, because they do that in a lot of like one thing I noticed about the Mesopotamian religion, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, they're challenging the goddesses all over the place. They challenge Ishtar in the Epic of Gilgamesh, if you're familiar with that. Gilgamesh really insults Ishtar. He rejects her and insults her, and he gets away with it, which had struck me as like, that's an interesting story to have your main character insulting the gods and living to tell the tale. Um, and it's noteworthy that he's insulting the goddesses and not the male gods. Um, but that's another. We'll have that one for another day. The Epic of Gilgamesh, and Ishtar and all that, because that's a really important topic. But that's one of my theses, is as we go from the Sumerian to the Babylonian. I'm just going to use Babylonian as a shorthand. The goddesses are much higher ranked in the Sumerian era, which is early Bronze Age, and then the Babylonian era is like late Bronze Age, and then Iron Age. When you in the written laws that the women lose status, when you put all the various law codes in order, in historical order, you see the women losing rank in each successive law code. You'll see the goddesses get like more and more insulted in each successive set of stories. You just see the goddesses losing rank as we go over this period of the Bronze Age, and then, as I've said before, in the Iron Age, they lose it completely. So, yeah. I mean, I didn't prepare anything more than this, because I figured this could be enough to talk about, or we don't have to have it be a super long conversation either. I'm open to.
Well, isn't one of the main theories, say, out there, right? Main theories, and because I don't recall where I first heard this, but that because the Iron Age really demanded a lot more sort of physical strength, that really was one of the major tipping points for sort of the balance of, like, men over women, prioritizing men and men's strength and that sort of thing over women. And so it would make sense too that they would do the same to the goddesses.
Right.
So I don't know. But
yeah, no, I think the whole thing in heaven as on earth, I think all of the lot, as the goddesses are losing status over the course of the Bronze Age and Iron Age, it's reflective of women losing status in their societies. And so that's very much the theme of what we want to get talking to in the Bible, with the Kadesha priestesses going from being the holy ones to being the temple prostitutes, and your daughter's not allowed to be one. That sort of that one character alone, that one personage alone, exemplifies the whole thing. That the priest is going from being exalted to being abused. And yeah, and physical strength is absolutely part of it. I mean, in the Iron Age, which sounds like a pretty rough place a lot of the time, the Roman Empire was very much of a might makes right kind of society. And so, yeah, the women, the women didn't really have much of a chance against swords and horses and men in armor, who are perfectly happy to like force women into slavery and bondage and kill them. I mean, just the women don't have much of a chance, really. That's what makes the modern age so exciting. The shift into the space age is resetting all of the table for everything and bringing back a lot more opportunities for women to regain their strength in asymmetric ways.
Do you think that part of these cosmologies and why they're not paying more homage to like the goddesses or the divine feminine, would that have to do with a lot of like the really ancient civilizations having been matriarchal, and this would be like the pushback or the backlash?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. No, I think the whole thing is, I think the matriarchy versus patriarchy is fundamentally about family structures. And then from there, it's the overall structure of overall society. And I think the default condition for most of human history are matriarchal tribal structures where there's no big governance beyond tribes. And then tribes interact with other tribes. As we get into the Bronze Age is where we get civilizations, where we get, the built up, or what I call, when I talk about civilization, the way I use the term, I specifically mean like urban, built up urban areas, with like technology, and it requires some measure of hierarchy just at a management level. So indigenous people, in my mind, don't have civilization. Not that they're uncivilized, or they just literally didn't build like Native Americans did not build a big urban built cities, right? They just didn't do that. Doesn't make them less of people. That's the way I'm using the term civilization, is specifically about big technology, urban areas using technology and stuff. And so, yeah, I think as we shift into that area, which coincides with kingship and armies and slavery and class-based exploitation, it all happens at the same time in the Bronze Age because of in my opinion, because of a technology shift that allows these warlord men to start impose themselves as a new power over all of these tribal villages that have been there for thousands of years in the Neolithic. And these men start to impose themselves as a new ruling class, and like they impose themselves as a hierarchical ruling class, and they impose patriarchy as a top-down phenomenon because they start taking slaves, and the first slaves that they took were women. For like 1,000 years, they didn't take male slaves. They only took female slaves. They killed the men because they didn't know what to do with them. They didn't have, the men would resist, first of all, and you had to have something for them to do that was like, organized. And without that organization and without the, psychology of the people to even accept their slavery, it was much easier just to kill the men, but you could enslave the women because you kidnap their children or you impregnate them. And you keep the docile women, and any women that is strong enough to resist, you kill her too, along with the men. And so you just end up with women who are, they'll protect their babies. So they will submit. And then over a very long period of time, it took a few thousand years. Eventually it spreads out across all of society. But one of the things we'll be talking about is this transition from matriarchal tribal families to patriarchal families. And I firmly believe that they were coexisting during the Bronze Age, and they're like competing with each other. And one of the things you're seeing in the older parts of the Bible, so this is stuff we'll see earlier on, when you talk about the first patriarchs, Abraham was the first patriarch. Well, his wife, Sarah, was a matriarch. They lived in a matriarchal society. And when you dig into the details of their relationship and their family structure, it's actually, you can see that that's a matriarchal family. And the same thing with Jacob, who gets the name Israel, and he's married to a couple of women, two sisters, Rachel and Leah. And then and then their two handmaidens. So between the four women with one father, those are the 12, they get the 12 children that become the 12 tribes of Israel. Um, that is also a matriarchal family. It's like the man is living with the woman's family, and the women are telling him who to go sleep with, and like which girl to impregnate. And it's like the girls are totally in charge of the whole thing. And it's kind of just like it's all been whitewashed, but there are these details slipping through the cracks that you can still observe and still discern from these Bronze Age families. Or the Book of Ruth is this story where it doesn't get people don't tend to pay a lot of attention to the Book of Ruth, but that's one where this woman, they'll mention in the Bible, they'll talk about your father's house or your mother's house. And I think they're simply talking about a matriarchal family or a patriarchal family. And so the Book of Ruth, the woman is married into a family of followers of Yahweh, and her husband dies. And the mother-in-law tells the two sisters, who's both their husbands died or something, go back to your mother's house. And like, you can go back to your mother's house, without really implying, detailing what that's all about. But the one girl, Ruth, who's the hero of the story, she decides to stay with her mother-in-law in a Yahweh patriarchal family. And then the whole story is about how Yahweh takes care of Ruth, brings her a new husband, and everything works out well for her because she decided to stay in the patriarchal family where Yahweh looked after her. And it's like propaganda to convince women to stay in these patriarchal households. Or another thing was that in that era, it was totally acceptable to just like kidnap women. Like on the field of battle, you could kidnap whatever woman you wanted. And it's one of the laws in the Bible that you're allowed to do that, which is what you see modern, jihadis doing it today. Like they'll just like snatch women off like these jihadis in the Middle East, they will just like snatch women and force them into marriage. Well, it's that was acceptable back then. And as that stuff happens over time, um, just these matriarchal families just get picked apart. Another thing is like kings demand taxes. When you go to kingship, now you've got a guy who's going to demand taxes from you. And that means you've got to put your land into production, like financial production. You can't just have subsistence agriculture. Now you've got to produce enough to pay the taxes to the king, or else they're going to take your land. And so this creates this economic pressure that forces people off the land and forces people to sell their babies and give them to the more richer families. And these kinds of pressures over time pick apart at the indigenous peasant villagers who had the old traditions, and their families just get picked apart until, like an old growth forest, eventually there's no matriarchal families left at all, like not inside of civilization. Where matriarchy survived into the modern day is all among indigenous people and Native Americans and different like little spots in Africa and spots in China and spots in Southeast Asia, where you've got these little isolated communities that maintain matriarchal traditions into the modern era. But they're all like very like isolated and few and far between. But it speaks to the reality of it, the historical reality of matriarchal families. And we can see lots of examples, and they have very common aspects about them, which is that, when you track your family line to the mother, you don't have to control the women's sex lives, and they can have the same sexual freedom as men. And the women generally hold much higher status relative to patriarchal families. The man goes and lives with the woman's family when you get married, and women stay with their matriarchal sisterhood. These are all huge advantages to women, because if it's an unhappy marriage, the women stay put and you kick the man out. And the inheritance is all passed to the daughters. So like all these little things make for a very different society and a very different, much better situation for women, obviously, than in a patriarchal household where you're living in the man's family. And if it's an unhappy marriage, the woman gets screwed basically in a modern patriarchal marriage. When it's unhappy, all the burden's on the woman. So yeah, I think that's this is my whole thesis, that the transition from matriarchy to patriarchy and is part of this transition from losing the goddesses. And that as we go back in, as we have yet a new transformation that we're going through now, that we don't know what the other side's going to look like. This is a chance for women to reestablish themselves. I view matriarchies like labor unions for women. Like the sisterhoods just got to start sticking together, and instead of organized labor, we need like organized women. So, Rosalie, anyone, Lisa, or I can just keep talking. I can keep ranting.
Okay, I have a question from a non-visual audience member. Hold on.
Okay.
Okay. Hi, this is Meta. I'm Rosalie's daughter.
Oh, hello.
Hello. I've just been here and listening in, and I want to just take it back because I was just thinking. I've just been thinking about the water goddesses a lot. The Orishas have been coming in really strong for me lately, specifically Yemanja and Oshun. And Yemanja is the mother of all creation and the goddess of the sea, and Oshun is her daughter, and she's the goddess of the fresh waters in the river. And one of the medicines of Yemanja is that she opens the floodgates of our emotions. And, I was just sitting here thinking about how, um, the water is so connected to our emotions, to our intuition, to our magic. And we all beings like carry this both energies of masculine and feminine, and the emotions I definitely feel are the realm of the feminine. And that's one of the other things we've lost in the patriarchy is our right to like our full emotional expression, and men have lost that and women have been shamed for that. And so I think that that's also an interesting connection, like with the suppression of the goddess and the suppression of the waters also came the suppression of our emotions, and also the suppression of our like magic and our intuition and our trust and our knowing, which is also very associated with the waters. And that's also something I've thought about for a really long time, is thinking about how the patriarchy and the loss of the mother and the goddess, I think, was also this, and the way the church has gone about things, it's like taking away our personal power, of divinity, and is a lot of what the church has done. And so, and yeah, so those are just some thoughts, and now my mom has some thoughts. Yeah, and oh gosh, it just let
Those
me
are all
see.
great
Oh,
points.
okay. And before we move on from there, so that is my offspring, and her chosen name is Meta Rose. And she chose Rose to honor the matriarchy, so she was very intentional. Yeah, because my mother is Rosalie, and so is my abuela, and there's so many women in my line. Oh yeah, the Rose, yeah, but the whole, and it's all it's all the Magdalene, also the Magdalene lineage. So yeah, so and I think that's really interesting also, because we talk about how this kind of patriarchal influence, they dissolve first the name, and then then it's the first the reverence, and then the name, and then they disappear. So I think that this movement these days of the millennials writing their own name, not using their birth name, but actually creating their names. It's like God said, "Let there be light," and it was in the saying it. It was. I think that's like a reclamation of so many things. So anyway, so yeah, that's my offspring who claimed her name, Meta Rose Meta, short for Miss Metamorphosis. My mama loves to brag about me.
Yeah, I think those are all great points, and I really want like the women to like tune in on all this, like, or chime in on all this, like, emotional feminine stuff, because like as the old white guy, I'm not as keyed in on. I'm not as good at that. But yeah, like all these different goddesses. I mean, that's she made some really great points there, and all I'm trying to articulate what I want to say about like the
First of all, I
Shakti.
can't see you, Ed. I don't know. Lisa, can you see Ed?
He's frozen, but I can hear him fine.
Yeah, I can hear. Okay,
Did it
there you
freeze
are.
up?
Okay.
All right, well, let me.
There you are. You seem to be back.
All right, am I back? We can take
Yeah.
this off here. Is that
Here
better?
we go.
Yeah.
That might help. Yeah.
One of the coolest things that I feel like I've learned about all this goddess stuff is the notion that all the goddesses are all one big super goddess. That all the goddesses are Shakti and all the goddesses are Isis, and that even works across cultures, and so many of these like Indian goddesses. The Indian goddesses, we have the best like modern writings about them because like it's contemporary thinkers, whereas we only have these fragments from like the ancient Greeks, and that we're not getting the full justice of like what ancient Egyptians thought about Isis and Hathor and all this stuff, because like it's all being we've only got scraps of information, and then it's being gone through the academics who put it through their lens, and so we're not getting the full picture. But with modern Indian Shakti traditions, we can get really robust philosophy, and there's so many different goddesses, and they do represent these different aspects of life, and so many of them represent different emotional frameworks, that that I think is like so important and so interesting and so relevant. So like intuition and magic and emotion are things that have been totally beat out of us. They totally get beat out of us. And if you go like into an Ivy League research kind of setting where you're told science is truth, all those things you just listed, intuition, emotion, and magic, are all like literally beat out of you. You cannot use any of those things as evidence in Ivy League research. Like you will be kicked right out of school. They don't even allow you to posit that there's free will or that consciousness is bigger, exists outside your brain. I mean, there's just so many limitations on what we're taught in the West, both from a Christian perspective and from an Enlightenment perspective. And yet those things are obviously very, very important and very real. And to say that, they persecuted magic, I mean, hell, they were burning witches for hundreds of years by
And
the
still
thousands.
and still the practice is still very, very much alive. I just read an article about it in many parts of Africa. There's witch hunts. But that brings another point. When you start talking about emotions, that brings another fascinating point about the persecution of women and goddesses and how that affects men as well. I mean, patriarchy is just as toxic for the men as for the women. And Ed, I think it's actually a great magic trick that you keep disappearing. It's almost like honoring the women that are in the audience and here with you. That you're just going to take a step and just disappear yourself and just let us women. Yeah. Thank you for that.
The IT guy in me is like, it's a bad network connection. Yeah. It is. I lost. I forgot what I was going to say there, but
About men and how they are
Oh
also
yeah. No, that was another thing I learned about like these matriarchal family structures. I'm like, man, they make it so much easier for the man, because like there's so much of the when you have like I have an ex-wife and kids, and I did the whole like marriage and kids thing. And like, it's hard being a provider, you get there's a lot of pressure on you. And when you put men and women into like a solo nuclear family arrangement where there's no support for the mother, and so she's stressed out all day long, she doesn't have any help. And then the husband goes out and he's got these huge expectations on him, which is getting increasingly hard to like keep up with, like just financially, like it's harder and harder every day. for like a single man to provide for an entire family and send the kids to college. I mean, it's crazy. So like you put these huge burdens on men, the women are all stressed out, the man's all stressed out, then the marriages are all miserable, and then the marriages fail. And you see it happening all over the place, and everyone's unhappy, and like everybody's struggling. And I'm like, man, these matriarchal families where like the women are helping each other out and the women are like watching the kids collectively, Jesus, they would all be so much happier. The women would be so much more relaxed all day long if they're socializing while they watch the kids instead of like watching the kids all solo. And then it takes so much burden off the men um, to not have to be like this sole provider for everything. Um, just be like, it just seems like so much more chill, frankly, than what we have today. Um, I can see, I can see a lot of advantages to that.
Um, One thing that I am thinking about also when you were saying that piece before, I think it's important that we also like make sure to recognize that like not all is lost. And one thing that's like really, I think, impressive in all colonization stories is the stories of like what survived and how it did, and like I know that with like a lot of African American families, like a lot will say that those family systems are still matriarchal, and it is the
Right.
grandmothers and the mothers together that, still hold it down for their families. And so I think it's just also like important to like I just think that's important in this like time too, to just recognize that it's like there still is a lot left. And like and it's beautiful also in, like a lot of like African and also Latino versions of, Christianity. They've found ways to like make sure that their traditions have still survived within that, in ways they might not even recognize today, but that their, those like ancestors that were in the process of colonizations like found ways to like keep their traditions throughout that process. And yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna chime in on that. She's my little inspiration. But yeah, just to chime in on that, because like we come from the Arawak, Taino, Puerto Rican lineage, and one of the ways that they marginalized Tainos was to actually claim that we were extinct. So there was about 1 million people on the island, and that was the first island Christopher Columbus landed on. And they said that they were decimated either through war or disease, but the truth is 25% of them survived. And Med and I, as I might have mentioned before, are moon dancers, and a lot of that was actually salvaged and is being revived right now. So when we're having the conversation about the dissolution and disappearance of the goddesses, I think we also need to say feminine energy is rising, and there is more and more goddess gatherings and these moon dances. And the Dalai Lama predicted, and I agree, that the future is feminine. We just have to get through this next birthing process.
Yeah, no, I want to thank you guys for saying that. That's really important. And I took this is one of the main reasons why I'm into all this whole subject is because I do see it as a means to rebuild the bonds with the Native Americans and indigenous people all over. Um, as a child of colonists, someone who's very much came in as my family were here as colonists in the 1600s. So I think about this stuff a lot. Like, how do we repair those wounds and reconnect with the wisdom that we need right now from the Native Americans? That like we denigrated them and for so long, but there's really important stuff that they know that we need to understand. And I do believe that because part of it was Christianization, was like Christianizing the natives and like thinking that we were doing them a favor by bringing them to Jesus. And I think that's we need to like flip that, and like that we need to like completely invert that entire concept. And that's why I like the mother so much. It's like, all right, if you put the mother back in the equation, this gives us a chance to like intellectualize reconnecting with natives and stuff, and like and indigenous traditions that are nature centric, um, because as we try to make sense of what does the mother mean, we I mean, I totally learned it from the Native Americans. It was like literally like how I made sense of this, like how is where I learned what matriarchal cultures even were, was from Native Americans. So like I want to be a part of that, cultural um, healing of the wounds, and with Black communities and with the Native Americans. I feel like it's really important. I think it's America in the 21st century. This is one of the things we have to do, is repair these wounds. And I think the mother can be a mechanism for that. Um, I sincerely believe it. I don't have all the answers, but I think that that's critical to the whole process.
I want to mention on this note that when I was getting my master naturalist certification, what I did my thesis on was land acknowledgement. So I work with Piscataway, and I interviewed this one young man, and I wanted to make sure that the land acknowledgement was more than performative and meaningful, and I wanted to get their feedback. And so a lot of land acknowledgements, we stand on stolen land, but he was like, that doesn't capture it. It's not about having stole the land. It's having robbed both parties of what could have been possible with collaboration. And I thought, now that's powerful.
Yeah, that's a
Now
much better way
that's
to put it.
powerful. That's powerful. That's him coming out from underneath this idea of mine and yours, and pointing out that we lost. And
Right.
again, Buddha says, and I believe, is the greatest source of suffering is the illusion that we're separate. And that young man brought it right home. He was like, we
Yeah,
were
yeah,
all robbed.
it's a great way to put it. It's a really terrific way to put it. And I don't know if I've mentioned it to you guys before, but one of my favorite stories of the colonial era is about the Marymount. It's not really a very good story, to be honest with you, but about the Marymount colony, which was the most prosperous colony in the 1620s, in the early days, when at the same time that they were settling the Plymouth colony up in Massachusetts. This was another Massachusetts colony, but they were the pagan pilgrims, and they were totally friendly to the natives. And so this guy, Thomas Morton, had this whole colony where they were totally friendly to the natives. They were doing a bang up business in the fur trade because like that they were working with the natives, and he was encouraging all his men to marry native women, and they're having all these parties. And the Plymouth colonists, the Puritans down in Plymouth, which was like 30 miles away, absolutely hated these guys' guts, and eventually came and burned down the whole place and had them all arrested. And so that's what happened to the pagan pilgrims in the 1620s. The so-called good guy Puritans over in Plymouth literally burned the place to the ground. But there was a lot of folks, all the 1600s and 1700s. There was loads of white folks that were leaving the colonies and joining the natives because the natives had it better. They knew how to live. They were much kinder. They had much better morals and ethics. The natives were quite shocked at the way Europeans treated their poor people, and that you even could have like
And their women.
Yeah. That you could have people living in squalor in the street, and a rich man step over them and like step into his house. But the Native Americans were aghast at all that. And so, yeah, it's a damn shame. I don't know, at least if you had something to say there.
But natives also understood how to eat, how to cultivate food, how to forage, how to hunt and do everything sustainably. Women had more important roles within the communities. So yeah, but all of this really just with the denigration and disrespect of women over so many thousands of years, it really does also show up as the way we treat the earth and, the environment and everything. And there's no separation between those. It was like when I said earlier about the four elements, and earth and water are considered the quote feminine ones. But everything that I understand, all the studies that I do point to, we have to make reparations to the land and the earth. We have to make reparations and bring women and people of color up. And we've got to do it like a long time ago,
Right.
because the way that things are headed and how horrible things are. You know, women's bodies and the earth are not separate. And actually, nobody's bodies are separate from the earth. We would have absolutely nothing, and I mean nothing, if it weren't for the earth. Like, the only thing that we would have that is ours is like our bodies, you know, our just our corporeal selves. Everything else the earth has given us. And it's, you know, the earth is being treated like you can just go in and take everything you want
Feed it and rape it, right?
without asking permission or giving thanks. And that's another thing the Native Americans knew what to do.
Right.
They asked permission. They gave gratitude and thanks, and they only took what they needed.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, in my environmental work, I'm all about putting ecosystems first and not like science and technology first. And then at a purely practical level, like our physical health, like our bodily health is totally tied to the health of like our immediate ecosystems around us. If you're living in pollution, you're going to get sick. And if you live in a healthy place, you will have a healthier go of it. And that's just not like a controversial statement. So if we want to be healthy, we need to like clean up the planet, right? But sometimes it seems like the powers that be don't want us to be healthy, you know? Sometimes it seems like that.
We could go down a huge, long, dark rabbit hole with that one, couldn't we? I mean, my God.
So we'll talk about, you know, how the feudal oligarchs don't have our best interests in mind on another night. Because I'm pretty sure they don't. But yeah, so the mother, like we got to put her back in the equation, put the mother back in the Trinity. I firmly believe this, that if you're an open-minded Christian, you love Jesus, you love God, you can love the mother too. And you don't miss a beat. It doesn't contradict the gospels. We can have a Trinity of Mother, Father, Son, and it's just so much better than a Trinity of Father, Son, Holy Ghost. And when we try to like make sense of what the mother is, ask the Native Americans, frankly, among others, Native Americans and others. But like we could here in the United States, that's a good place to start.
But it's just nature, right?
It is.
Yeah, you have a mother, you have a father, you have offspring.
Yeah,
that's another place where the Bible and Christianity, patriarchal religions, have divorced from nature.
Yeah, it was very intentional and like didn't happen by accident. It was a big argument. Like they argued about this stuff for a long time until they ended up with a divorce. It was one thing I've come to understand is that like in the Roman era, when they were debating between Egyptian religion and Greek religion, like this was the big difference between Greek religion. So in Egyptian religion, Isis is at the head of they've got the Trinity of Mother, Father, Son, and Isis is the most important one. We don't really get taught that in the West, but it's really in Egypt, Isis is top dog. And she was the most popular deity in the Roman Empire because that religion had been advanced and was all over the Roman Empire. And they were debating with followers of Greek religion, Roman religion. And the worry we are part of nature or separate from nature was at the heart of the dispute. Because like the Isis followers, they saw themselves as part of nature. That's why all the Egyptian gods are half human, half animal, and all the Greek gods are just humans. That was like a symbolically defining this, that the Greeks objected to the idea that we were on the same plane with the animals. For the Greeks, like humans were the highest creation. And that idea is also in the Bible and is like a pillar of Western culture. But rival cultures have a different perspective, that we are part of nature. So it's been going on for a long time. And but that's very much what the mother's all about, is that recognizing we are part of nature. And I view Gaia not as a theory, but as a reality. Like there is one big living creature, and we are microorganisms and a bigger macroorganism. And the living web of life has its own consciousness, and we are absolutely part of this web of life. And that at a certain point in my adult life, you know, I had this flip, you know, this gestalt shift in my perspective and I came to just see like the whole world as one big living plant, the planet as a one big living creature. And once I started to see the world that way, I couldn't really unsee it. And
No, you can't. I mean, some people do. They end up kind of, I don't know how, like they see it and they practice the kinds of things that, are animistic and earth-based, but then some of them do end up going back and becoming like born again, or, going back to Christianity and the Bible. And I don't understand, because to me, that doesn't follow like, I don't know, nature for one thing, but evolution and understanding. You can't unsee once you've seen it.
yeah, well, maybe we should wrap it up there, unless anyone has anything more comment. We're coming on an hour. I think it's been a nice little conversation, and if anyone has anything more they want to say, but we can end it there. Once you see her, you can't unsee her. And
Thanks, Ed. And Ed, is it Creation Genesis 2? Is that next time? Is that correct?
Garden of Eden next week. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that one's going to be really interesting.
There's a little more to talk about, and I've got my own thesis on the Garden of Eden. I think Eve represents Asherah and the Kadesha priestesses, and it represents them shutting down this old tradition. Just as I was saying before about the one mythology being built on the previous generation, I think that's exactly what's happening in the Garden of Eden. That the serpent is like, the serpent goes from being good in the goddess traditions to being bad in the patriarchal traditions. The tree of life, it's all about sacred plants and entheogenic plants. I think it's cannabis, but even leaving that out of it, I think it represents, the traditions of sacred plants, and they're literally saying you can't do this anymore. Like, we're going to shut the door on these old traditions, and your old priestesses, we're putting them out of business, and Eve is being made, subordinate. Whereas Lilith was not subordinate, the previous wife. So yeah, lots to talk about next week. And thank you all. Thank you, Rosalie. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Meta.
Thank you.
Everybody, thank you so much for this conversation. We'll see you next time.
Okay.
All right,
Bye.
thanks.
Bye.